The only reason it seems that Joe Biden is not being prosecuted for his misuse of classified documents is because he doesn't have the mental capacity to stand trial and be too sympathetic to a possible jury. Christie, you've been in so many court cases, got this rich legal background, former governor of New Jersey, author of a brand new book called What Would Reagan Do? Life Lessons from the Last Great President. Governor, welcome back. What are your thoughts about what took place yesterday afternoon?
Well, look, I think it's a public confirmation from objective people of what we all see publicly, which is that Joe Biden has been declining, is in decline mentally. And there's no doubt, I can tell you, as someone who did this work for 7 years as the U.S. Attorney in New Jersey, that how a potential defendant will come off as a witness is absolutely an important consideration on whether you bring a prosecution and think you can prove to a jury that someone's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think there were two problems here that they pointed out. Problem number one, which you just stated very clearly, that this is a crime that requires a knowing act. And that's what they said. I mean, this is even more damning than most people have pointed out, Brian. It's not just his memory. They're saying that back in 2017, they don't think they could definitively prove that back then, 7 years ago, that Joe Biden was capable of a knowing act that he would recall. That's pretty extraordinary. It's not just talking about where his mental capacity sits today. It's tying it back to where his mental capacity may have sat even in 2017.
Yeah, and
then secondly,
okay, go ahead, sorry.
And then secondly, the fact that Biden, when confronted about the documents, cooperated, turned the documents over immediately, that also shows a level of cooperation that would also make it difficult to convince people that his crime was a knowing crime.
So I was shocked to see in a legal document the words that might have been spun out. Like sometimes it leaks, according to reports. Robert Hur would have put this in, but I saw it in black and white. He did not remember when he was vice president, forgetting on the first day of the interview when his term ended. When did I stop being vice president? Forgetting the second day on the interview when his first term began. The report says he didn't remember the year that Bo died. He couldn't get within several years of when Bo died. And what you're talking about in 2017 is tapes they listened to of him talking to his ghostwriter. By the way, using classified documents he had no business taking about an interaction he had with Afghanistan, a letter he wrote to Barack Obama as vice president. And they're saying that in 2017, with his interaction with his ghostwriter, it sounds like he was losing it. So to me, this is so much worse than anything the Biden team could have hoped for.
Well, of course, it's worse than if they would have said they were going to charge him.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. And look, and I hope that for everybody listening out there, it begins to dispense with this idea of a two-tiered system of justice. I mean, Brian, the fact is that you're right. This is the kind of stuff in a two-tiered system of justice that would have just been leaked out and nobody would have known whether they really believed it or didn't, whether it was rumor or not. These prosecutors saw something that they thought was important to the decision they made, and to make sure the public knew why they made those decisions, they put brutal honesty into these documents. This was no, fixed job for Joe Biden. And I think that a lot of people would have expected that out of the Merrick Garland Justice Department. And you hear that from some people in our party regularly. And I hope that I don't care what the politicians think. I care what the public thinks. And I think this should restore, at least in some part, the public's confidence in the fact that there are a lot of good professional prosecutors who, when the truth needs to be told, will tell it. Because those are the prosecutors that I worked with when I was in the Justice Department.
A couple of things, Governor. So really, you're saying if justice is equal, the reason why Trump is being charged is because he hasn't lost his memory?
I think that's part of it. And I think the other piece I told you is important, too. If the facts alleged by Jack Smith are correct, and I think they are, that Donald Trump actively fought returning the documents, actively instructed others to obstruct subpoenas, That's a much different circumstance than someone who, when confronted with it, says, come do a search, take whatever you want to take. We know that Donald Trump has said he didn't want them taking his boxes, that he instructed certain people to hide certain boxes from even his own lawyers. So it's both those things, is that Donald Trump would not be seen as a sympathetic witness because he does not have the same, from the prosecutor's perspective, doesn't have the same memory issues that Joe Biden has. And secondly, Donald Trump obstructed their investigation while Joe Biden cooperated with it.
See, the whole thing of obstruction, you know the legal terms. But if you take classified documents consistently over 40 years, and you just say, hey, I'm literally going to put them anywhere, in bad boxes, in bad garages, in musty attics. And I'll cooperate if you ever ask me. But I'm not going to say anything unless you ask me. So when they asked him, do you have classified documents? You could check. And the answer is, oh, yeah, you got a lot of them. I mean, isn't that...
Well, and Brian, but I think, Brian, that's why they said right at the first page of the report that they believe he willingly and knowingly took those documents. And so that's the other thing that was great about the report. They didn't justify Joe Biden's conduct. They said he willingly and knowingly took these. And then they said, but because his memory is so bad, we think it'll make him a sympathetic witness and make it difficult for us to prove what we believe is true, which is that he willingly and knowingly took them. And because he cooperated, that would be another thing that the jury could consider that would make him more sympathetic. It doesn't make Donald Trump's decision to obstruct it justifiable. It just means that Joe Biden gets that benefit because he didn't obstruct. But in the end, I think the important thing for everybody to note is they didn't make an excuse for Joe Biden's conduct. Right up front, in the first sentence of the report, they say, the prosecutors believe that he willingly and knowingly took these documents.
You want to be entertained?
Yeah.
Here is Congressman Dan Goldman, cut 20.
My understanding as well, Joe, is that during these 5 hours, President Biden went through in great detail many conversations that he had with various other people from years and years ago. So he cherry-picked a couple of examples that perhaps we don't know, perhaps are in context, perhaps are out of context, related to very sensitive issues such as his son, really just to bash him, just to impugn him. And it is...
So you get it. You get what they're doing. This is not spinnable. Yeah. I don't think he knows this is not spinnable, because you know what the answer would be? Do me a favor, release the tapes. Do you think they want those tapes released?
Hell no. And look, the idea to say that they were taking a cheap shot at him when they chose not to prosecute him. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the ultimate cheap shot in this context would have been to prosecute him. They didn't. They made an objective decision. But an objective decision has to include the truth. And the truth is that when you can't remember when your term started, you can't remember when your term ended, you can't remember the date of your son's passing, that those were relevant to the decision not to prosecute, so they have to be put in the report if you're going to be a fair prosecutor.
So the thing that really matters most, so one, we're looking back and saying who's prosecuting and, equal justice, I got it. The other thing is he's running a country. It's our country. It's the world's most powerful country. And the Middle East is on fire right now. Our guys are being shot at regularly. And he is evident we are a number one supplier of Israel. Listen to this exchange. The same press conference, he came back to answer this question. Cut 10.
I'm of the view, as you know, that the conduct of the response in the Gaza Strip has been over the top. I think that, as you know, initially the president of Mexico, Christie, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in.
Okay, you hear him struggling, and you heard what he said. The Mexican president, Christie. So, he didn't say Mubarak. That's a plus. But that is the hottest place in the world right now. He just said what the Saudis have been saying, what all the enemies of Israel are saying, that the attacks on Gaza are over the top. He's never said that publicly before. And then he says Mexican's president. Your response?
Look, I think it shows exactly what the prosecutor was saying, that in fact there are real moments where his memory does not serve him well, and as a result doesn't serve the country well. And secondly, it's awful staff work. Look, one of the things you learn as a principal is that when your staff tells you not to go do a press conference when you're angry, as much as you want to go do one, you shouldn't do it. And the other thing that struck me during that press conference yesterday, Brian, was how angry Joe Biden was.
Yep.
And whenever you go out there as a principal with a lot of responsibility and you are answering questions from the media out of anger, it never serves you well, your cause well, or the country well. And I know they felt like they needed to respond to this report,
right,
but they should have waited until he calmed down after reading. And let's face it, he's no dummy. He knows the political implications of what the Justice Department wrote about him yesterday. He was angry about it, and he came out and performed in a way that made matters worse, not better.
So, Governor, what happens? Does Barack Obama come to him and says, "You can't win, Rock. You got to throw in the towel"? I mean, do you think he continues? He's already turned down the Super Bowl interview. I mean, we've never seen anything like this before. What do you think?
Look, I think it's very problematic for the Democratic Party because now that everyone's waited this long, let's face it, Brian, the primaries can't be used anymore by anybody to accumulate delegates other than Joe Biden. Almost all of the states where in the country are having primaries, the filing deadlines have passed for almost all of them. And so now what you're talking about is if Joe Biden is going to be replaced, it's going to happen at the Democratic National Convention in August as a technical matter. And, imagine what are they going to do? Kamala Harris is the vice president. I think there are many, if not most, Democrats who believe that would not be a significant improvement over Joe Biden. And so if you want to start looking for people outside of Kamala Harris, how do they pass over Kamala Harris?
I know.
And put someone else in? I think, this is what happens. Look, this is what happens when people don't have the guts to do the right thing, Brian. And the right thing was for Joe Biden not to seek re-election. I've said it over and over again publicly that he's passed his sell-by date and that he needed to step aside voluntarily. He didn't do it. And now the Democrats are in a very, very difficult political position.
Do you think?
Go ahead.
Do you think Donald Trump is the next president then?
I don't know, because guess what else we don't know? We don't know what's going to be happening to Donald Trump between now and November. I mean, the fact of the matter is, Brian, after him losing the immunity appeal in the D.C. Circuit, and I do not believe the Supreme Court will take the case. I don't think there's anything in that opinion that is controversial enough to make the Supreme Court have to take the case. I think it's a pretty cut and dry decision. And so that means Donald Trump's going to go on trial for the January 6th events this spring, probably in May. And we don't know, but I'll tell you this, it's going to be, as I predicted during the primary, a very ugly trial where it's going to be allies of Donald Trump who are testifying against him. Mark Meadows testifying against him. Members of his campaign team testifying against him. And so what's going to happen when you have two such flawed candidates in Trump and Biden is flawed because of their age, flawed because of their personal conduct. There are going to be more surprises between now and November. Right. And I don't think any of us can predict what's going to happen between now and November.
What would Reagan do is the name of your book. What would Reagan recognize? Would Reagan recognize this type of conundrum that both political parties are in right now?
He wouldn't. He wouldn't understand why they were acting the way they're acting, why they won't work with each other on anything, even something as important, universally important as fixing our border situation, universally important as dealing with our debt, universally important as making sure that America remains the strongest power in the world. Ronald Reagan would not understand holding up aid to Ukraine. He wouldn't understand holding up aid to Israel. He wouldn't understand any of that. And I'll tell you what else he wouldn't understand. He wouldn't understand not standing up for the truth. You know, I write in the book, one of the chapters is about when Ronald Reagan stood up to the John Birch Society in the 1960s, which was a very difficult, racially challenged and anti-Semitic group that had a lot of influence in the Republican Party in the mid-1960s. And the only two people who stood up were Ronald Reagan and William F. Buckley. And they did it together, and they changed the direction of our party, and as a result, changed the direction of the country. Ronald Reagan knew that standing up for what was right isn't always easy. But if you want to be a true patriot, it's what you need to do.